Good morning. Hope you're doing well today. Well, I say good morning as if everyone is going to reach this in the morning. But anyway, good morning. I'm sticking with it. Good morning. Hope you're doing well. Just got back, sat down in the office, thinking about what I might tackle today. There was a couple of requests following this Game Fest week. And towards the top of the list was to talk about Phil Spencer's sit-down interview with Ryan from IGN. And yeah, I mean, I certainly felt like it was worth talking about for sure. This was, as I discussed in my recap video for the Xbox game show, this was a really important couple of days for Xbox. I think that goes without saying. They needed some PR wins. They needed some stuff to come together in their favor. The showcase went very well. I think that the vast majority of people, regardless of how they feel about Xbox, could agree that that was a pretty substantial, whichever one you want to use, showcase for them. Great showing for Xbox. And so to follow that up, though, there's this interview. And this interview, I feel like I remember Ryan talking about this on Twitter back when a lot of the studio closures and some controversy were going down. And he was talking about how he had, this interview was already scheduled to some degree before all this, and so, which makes sense because to lock down Phil Spencer, you probably don't get to just do that on a casual Tuesday. You got to give him some heads up. So anyway, this was an interesting interview from that standpoint. That a lot of people were thinking, okay, well, how much is Ryan going to be able to push back on what is probably going to be some non-answers from Phil regarding things like the closures of the studios, like Arcane Austin, Tango Gameworks, and the rest. And how much you could really get out of Phil in general here. How, especially, this is like they've got a small studio audience. This is live, and Phil has put himself intentionally in the position many times now of the guy that goes out for better or worse and takes it on the chin for the brand, which I guess you have to respect to some degree, no matter how corporate, political, shenanigans may always be involved with that. Not everyone chooses to go out and do that themselves. So this is a 28-minute interview. I can't remember if that's like including some of the extracurriculars that happened after the interview wrapped up, but we're going to go over this. We're going to watch it. I've got it here. You can see to the side of my old Chrome Dome, and we'll watch, and then I'll probably pause through when I got some comments on things, and I felt like this was probably the best way to do this format instead of just doing a talking head format with no context for people who perhaps didn't see it. So let's get right into it. Let's not waste any more time. And let's see what old Phil Spencer has to say.
Welcome to IGN Live. Earlier today, we got a brand new Xbox game showcase from Phil Spencer and his team, featuring a ton of reveals and surprises. There's a lot to talk about. Who better to talk about the present and future of Xbox than the
Ryan
Xbox
McCaffrey
himself? They want to hear from you, my friend, not me. Phil Spencer, thank you and welcome to IGN Live.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, everybody.
So
your energy's incredible.
We have 1 hour together on the dot, and we have some friends coming in halfway through, some other awesome Xbox developers. So
people who actually build games.
I don't want to waste a second with you here, and I want to start. I said this earlier on this stage. I think you just had the best showcase you've ever had. I really mean. I said it before you got here.
Thank you, Ryan.
It really was fantastic. Now,
I would agree.
I know you plan these things months and months in advance. For anybody that doesn't know, that like the planning for this starts like the beginning of the year kind of thing.
That's right.
It's crazy. So I'm curious, at what point do you, with this one this year, do you get a feeling that, oh, this one's looking pretty good?
Yeah, you know.
Don't be humble. Just tell us the real answer here.
Honestly, like, until our fans, the customers, you guys give us the feedback, like Aaron Greenberg and I were talking about this 2 weeks ago. Now, the thing that probably hit me the most was obviously just the passion of the teams of putting their amazing work on stage and seeing so many teams do great work. But it was based, I'd say 2 months ago, when I just looked at the kind of scale of the franchises, how much work the teams were doing to show up the way they did, and the partners that we had in the show. Like, I was in awe of this show.
There's a couple games I want to ask you about specifically before we'll talk about some other stuff too, but the one that I said, right, for me, of all the great stuff from today, stole the show for me was something I wasn't expecting to see today again, which was Perfect Dark.
I knew you were going to say that.
Perfect Dark. A first-person spy espionage, some parkour, a little Mirror's Edge in there, which I love.
All playable, like all in-game. Somebody.
And that game's been cooking for a long time. We know that we've followed the.
No, I'm good. I'm a little skeptical. I mean, this is not, you know, this is not a major point of contention or anything per se, but I'm a little skeptical about him saying all playable, all whatever in that Perfect Dark trailer. There definitely looked like a couple of instances in which they were, you know, some of it was canned, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but just, you know, the game, if the game really was, you know, somebody playing through the entire trailer, that's very impressive. I don't think that's necessarily the case. That being said, like I said in my other video as well, I don't think there's anything in that trailer that we watched that is, you know, so far flung from the realm of possibilities for what the final product could include from a gameplay perspective. You know, I don't think there's anything there like that. But all gameplay.
Partners at Crystal have been doing amazing work there.
Yeah, Crystal was brought in to help it keep going. So
might be an asterisk.
What has it been like for you to kind of follow the very long trajectory of that game from, you know, it started with Daryl Gallagher starting a studio. And
just
now,
down the street.
Yeah, and now we're finally here. Like, so how has it been kind of getting to this point with Perfect Dark?
Yeah, you know, in parallel building a studio while you're building a game, and something that Perfect Dark back to N64 and obviously us with PDZ on 360, like there's just such anticipation for that game, and I really,
you know, I actually liked Perfect Dark Zero.
We've been talking about this for a long time.
I mean, it wasn't incredible,
like,
but I did like it.
This. When I saw it, I said, this is the one that Ryan's going to love, because we know his love for Spy, and I said, this is the one. And just so proud of the team, and it really just came together so well. And, I mean, a cool little story. Daryl had our other studio heads down at the studio just yesterday and walked through that same section in-game to show them, like, this is a game being played. And I love seeing our community of creators coming together that way.
Well, another, the one more thing, which we were all hoping for and got, was a new Gears of War game, but it wasn't. It wasn't Gears 6.
It was not.
It was not Gears 6. So, what, you know, you have a visibility into everything, but I'm curious, when you're in a meeting with, maybe it's Matt Booty, maybe it's Alan Hartman, but the Coalition folks, like, when you learn that they've gone down the E-Day road, the prequel road, rather than Gears, like, what was your reaction when you found out that was going to be the next direction for Gears of War?
Well, you know this. We've had some changes in leadership at the studio. Rod, who was there, is now leading Diablo for us. So I actually thought, a Diablo game I'm playing a ton of, I thought it was a nice opportunity for that team to establish their Gears, right? And following on Gears 5, just because the numerical thing, like, I think it would this was an opportunity for them to take it back to an origin story that I know you know, that has a lot of, like, real depth to it in terms of Emergence Day, and tell that story through the Coalition as it is today. I thought, like, what a great opportunity. I was excited. And then you probably saw, I know you heard it, the Mad World.
The Mad World. So I didn't mean to pause it that quick. I was actually just waiting to pause, but I'm here anyway now. So yeah, the Gears thing, the Gears showing was interesting. I really do think that going the prequel route was the way to go. Gears 6, you start to get to 6 and you're getting long in the tooth. It's not to say that they shouldn't be able to go back and whatever threads, tie them up and do that, but by the time this game comes out, the question that I have, and I'm sure they were probably asking themselves as well, is who is Gears of War 4 today? How many people are entering into Gears of War fresh versus, just they're the people that have been along for this journey since the beginning, which is great to have. But at some point, if you're going to continue on this franchise to some degree, you need to be able to bring in new people reliably. And that's perhaps more important now than it has been ever. I hate being so superlative, but the reality is that a game like this is going to cost a lot of money to make if they're going to do it right. And I suspect they are because it's Gears of War. So it's going to cost a fortune, 70, 100 million plus, $100 million plus dollars is probably the more likely scenario. You have to then ask the question, are there 7 to 10 million people willing to buy Gears of War today if it's Gears of War 6? And, there's a bunch of people looking at the number 6 and going, I missed 5 or I missed 4 or I haven't played since 3 or whatnot. And now we're at 6 and like, what, I'm not going to go back and play 3 other games before getting into 6 as a player that's been out of the game for a while, right? Or if you're a new player entirely and you've not played any of them, then, this is not some known quantity like Final Fantasy, where that most of the Final Fantasies, with special cases where they did multiple runs in like a 10 and a 13. It's not like each one's its own kind of like independent thing, right? So I think this is the right thing to do, for sure. The prequel route, and then only they could get away with slowing down Mad World even further for the trailer. Only them. Nobody else is allowed to do that.
World tune in the play fees.
Oh yeah.
Like for those of us who remember the 360
That's a deep
commercial,
cut. Yeah.
like how iconic was that? So when they went back and sourced that and brought that through the piece, I think it just showed that they kind of stayed true to what Gears is, but tell a new story, new arc.
Now, you're wearing a very cool Xbox Pride shirt today, but a year ago at the Xbox Showcase, you freaked out people like me by wearing a Hexen shirt, which is a game that I have very near and dear to my heart. And now, well, then too, you had just acquired Hexen. You owned that as a part of many other things. But then today, I see the reveal for Doom: The Dark Ages, and I go, well, wait a second.
How awesome was that?
I'm like, are you
why can we get Doom: The Dark Ages, but not Hexen?
In the Doom universe, because I know you and I share the love for this.
Yeah. No, I would like to say I'm actually smart enough to predict anything like that. I wasn't. But definitely, if you look at Doom: Dark Ages, and thanks to Marty and the team, they let me introduce that. Right, so I got to come out and like I was going through all my old school stories. For those as old as me who remembers Doom 1 on a floppy going, my only PC that could run it was my PC at Microsoft. So I would sneak it at night, put it in so I could play. So the opportunity to stand there and get to announce a Doom and then Doom: Dark Ages, which definitely has some Hexen in it. And I just thought Hugo and the team, fantastic work. I'm so proud.
That gun though.
No, I can't help
Come on, man. Whoever came up with this gun, I mean, I talked about it in my other video, but whoever came up with this gun right here, the skull gun, what do you even call this thing? But the conceptually watching this gun grind up the skulls to fire at enemies is just fantastic. I don't need to necessarily know where the skulls are coming from, or why they seemingly are so, well, I think we could probably guess as to why they're plentiful. But that's such a cool gun. I love that. That's crazy. Very Doom.
Bring up something that's been a topic of conversation a lot recently, which is that Doom: The Dark Ages is also going to ship on PS5, something that you've done with some other games. So can you, from a business level, like, can you walk me through, you paid $7.5 billion to acquire Bethesda's ZeniMax. So what's the calculus, like, what's the process there for deciding, like, okay, new Doom,
the money being made
multi-platform
selling this game on PlayStation will outpace
what's kind of the thought process
Game Pass volume.
It's definitely one of those franchises that has a history on so many devices.
Yeah,
I think they have like Doom running on a lawnmower somewhere when you go back. But and it's a franchise that I think everybody deserves to play. I'm really proud of what the team.
Pregnancy Test Doom, I think, was the craziest I've seen.
The team a couple of years ago, and I asked Marty what he wanted to do, and he said he wanted to ship it on all platforms. I said, let's go do that. Like, it was as simple as that. Now, I want to bring it back, though, because I get a lot of questions about, hey, if I'm an Xbox owner, what does it mean? And what I want to say, and I thought it showed up so well in the show today, you saw an amazing collection of games that are coming to Xbox. They're going into Game Pass day one. And Game Pass showed up so well. If you buy the game on our console, you get to play it on PC. You buy it on PC, so the cross entitlement stuff is all there, and we're focused on future hardware with forward compatibility. Our commitment to our Xbox customers is you're going to get the opportunity to buy or subscribe to the game. We're going to support the game on other screens, and you are going to see more of our games on more platforms. And we just see that as a benefit to the franchises that we're building. And we see that from players, and the players love to be able to play.
So this was a big and kind of important point here. That was a point of discussion, certainly out of several of the things that Phil talked about in this interview. And I'm not sure why it was such a big point of discussion, because I feel like this is, I feel like a lot of people were talking about this as if this was new news, or that this was new strategy or something along those lines. But I mean, this has been kind of their MO, Xbox's MO, for years now. But they're kind of driving force of the more places people can play, or the more places that gamers can play, the better kind of deal. And you could argue about why they chose to go that route, whether it's because you believe that the traditional hardware before software model is still viable, or will be viable for these companies in a decade. You could argue that. You could also just look at it like Microsoft taking advantage of their situation, and this is how I look at it. I don't think it's one or the other. I think it's a little bit a mix of things. I'll try to be not as scatterbrained about this, but Xbox One happens. Don Matrick takes the world's largest shit down Xbox's throat at E3, completely tanks it. Couldn't be worse. Inarguably the worst head of any of the big three: Microsoft, Sony, Xbox, or Sony, Nintendo, ever. Dude was a pylon, and took what substantial gains the brand had made during the 360 era and erased it in this tiny amount of time, and then made it extraordinarily difficult for who came after him, and that was Phil Spencer. But anyone, it could have been whoever was going to replace him. Very, very challenging to be able to regain the footing and brand trust and brand strength that they had going into the Xbox One era going forward. And that was its own challenge. And I think at some point, in the midst of attempting to figure out how to do that, I think that they sat down and had a good long discussion and thought, you know, we could throw a bunch of money at this. Clearly, Xbox and Microsoft aren't concerned about throwing money at things, so that's, you know, that's not part of the equation as to whether or not they would. But, you know, they probably thought we could throw a bunch of money at this, and we could attempt to regain our footing, and kind of stick to our you know, console first exclusives, to push hardware sales, to be able to justify bigger first party titles, etc., etc. That whole circle. And I have a sneaking suspicion that when they thought about it for 3 seconds, they probably figured real quick that that wasn't likely going to be the answer to their long-term success in the video game market. I think they probably asked themselves what, and which is smart to some degree to do, and I know Sony and Nintendo were doing the same things, just perhaps on a different time scale as Microsoft. But they, you know, they would have asked themselves, what exactly does the video game market look like in 20 years? You know, is this model going to be physical console and then first party titles, exclusives? Is that going to be in perpetuity, or is that going to be a smaller and smaller piece of the grander puzzle that makes up the tapestry of how people are playing games and interacting with them? Because you have to keep in mind, for those of you watching at home right now on this, the handful of people, you know, we represent a very hyper-specific corner of the market. We are far more, not to say that we know everything, obviously, but we are the far more informed video game player. We are a more traditionally hardcore group of individuals within the space because of that. But the average person, the average gamer, interfacing with any games are doing it either through their phone or they're doing it much more casually. They are not spending time in online discourse. They don't know all of the ins and outs. They don't know what Phil Spencer is saying. They probably don't even know who the fuck Phil Spencer is. Right? And that group of people makes up the vast majority of the consumer base. So they have to work with that in mind. And as this market has expanded and expanded outward and reached into different areas of the world, India, China, etc., and the types of gamers that exist in those markets and where those individuals are spending the majority of their money, these companies are trying to move with that. And that's going to mean having to make some tough calls. And I think that when they sat down and decide and try to come up with, you know, where is gaming in 20 years, the answer was, as technology progresses, people are going to expect or want to be able to play their games on whatever they've got, wherever they're going, and whatever they're doing. If they can get their hands on it, that's going to be ideal. And if we can provide that where nobody else is, or we can get there first, then maybe that's our inroads back into reclaiming what we were building towards, or what we had to some degree in the 360 era. Right? It's also much more profitable. This is why I talk about how in the future, not just Xbox, but I think PlayStation will as well. Nintendo is kind of its own special case. They might have to get there eventually, but they've got more runway to work with because of their own, you know, their own created little corner of the market. I say little, it's not, you know what I mean. Oh, where was I going with that? Oh, the brain fart at this. No, not like this. Anyway, Microsoft and Sony are going to have to be in a position where they get themselves to that point going forward, and Microsoft just so happens to be going there first, kind of because they have to, because of what happened in previous generations. That's, I think, the gist of it. And I think people are being a little too myopic about the exclusivity portion of this. I think they are spending too much time being caught up in that model. I don't think that model is going to last, because the reality is that the games are too expensive now. Like, if you want games to continue to be what they have been, and you know, there's clearly enough people that do, then this is kind of what's going to have to happen. It just so happens that Microsoft is doing it first. You're going to see Sony do it eventually, and then Nintendo is I mean, we're already seeing Sony do it with the PC. Nintendo will eventually, to some degree, have to follow suit as well. They just have more time.
Well,
Thank you.
there you go. I have to do the journalistically responsible thing now and bring the mood down. Otherwise, the internet would tear me apart. So I wanted to ask you. You haven't really commented publicly much in the last couple months. So I wanted to ask you about the studio closures and Tango Gameworks and some of the thoughts behind the decision making there. I mean, you had a critical darling in Hi-Fi Rush. You had folks like Aaron Greenberg saying it checked all these boxes for us and did all the right things here. So, walk me through the decision of why, really Tango specifically, not to disrespect the other studios that were closed, but that was the one that really seemed to kind of stick in the community's craw a bit. So I'm hoping here that you can take the opportunity to address that closure and some of the recent changes in Xbox.
Yeah, the closure of any team is hard, obviously, on the individuals there, hard on the team. And I try to spend all of my focus, as you said, I haven't been talking publicly about this, because right now is a time for us to focus on the team and the individuals. It's obviously a decision that's very hard on them, and I want to make sure through severance and other things that we're doing the right thing for the individuals on the team. It's not about my PR, it's not about Xbox PR, it's about those teams. In the end, I've said over and over, I have to run a sustainable business inside the company and grow. And that means sometimes I have to make hard decisions that frankly are not decisions I love, but decisions that somebody needs to go make. We will continue to go forward. We will continue to invest in what we're trying to go do in Xbox and build the best business that we can, which ensures we can continue to do shows like the one we just did.
On the the Activision Blizzard saga, that's all been, that probably maybe
You call it a saga?
Well, I don't know. Did it from covering it and watching it, it felt like it put like 5 years on my life.
Yeah.
Just as somebody that covers Xbox, I can't imagine how it was for you. But as that came to a close.
So I'll stop it there for now, because you've got the idea that Ryan is not following that question up. So this was clearly point two of what people were having, what people have been talking a lot about was Phil's answer to why Tango and what's going on there. Can you talk a bit more about it, et cetera, et cetera? And people are calling this a non-answer. Which is I think partially true, but I think it's also a bit unfair to everyone involved in this interview to some degree. So you have to keep in mind. So people, just to get Ryan's point, where people have been kind of jumping down his throat about this stuff, about him not following up. You have to understand, Ryan is working on a very tight schedule for this interview. This interview is scheduled many months in advance, and he's in a live setting with Phil in front of a live audience. And when you get an answer like that, the one that you just got from Phil, Ryan is smart enough to know that pressing further is not going to get a different answer. That is the answer that Phil is comfortable in giving, and pressing him in a live setting is not going to get you any different response. And and that's the best case scenario. If you were to press, is that you're not getting a different answer. the worst case scenario is you've now spoiled any opportunities to have a semi-casual, candid conversation as much as you can in this venue about everything else that you want to be able to talk about during this interview that people at home are also finding interesting. Because again, while there are lots of people that are interested in the closure of these studios, there are other aspects that people are interested in Ryan talking about. And if he spends all of his time and burning interviewee bridges, I don't mean permanently. I don't think Phil Spencer is so is so soft that he'd shut down the interview, but it does change the playing field a bit when you do that when you're interviewing somebody. So I just wanted to say that for Ryan, because I think that he made the right call to not continue pressing on that. I think it was very clear Phil was not going to give any more details or be any more specific about that, given what his answer was. To Phil's answer specifically, do I think it's a non-answer? Yes and no. It is, but it isn't. I think it's a non-answer insofar as that I don't know what people want Phil Spencer to say. I know when I watched this live, part of me was hoping that Phil would be a bit more candid about it, but this was pure hopium. There is no upshot to Phil, going into greater detail, because no matter how much detail he gives, people are going to ask for more detail. And if you give too much detail, there are just more questions that arise out of it, and it just snowballs into this even greater rat's nest of public opinion, and it becomes even more difficult to address. Which obviously Xbox and Phil doesn't want to have to manage. They've got enough that they're managing as it is, and they've just had like the best show of their freaking lives, and they're trying to circumnavigate that as well. So it is and it isn't a non-answer. Am I happy with it? No. Did I expect differently? No. He called back to something that he said a long while ago now about the concept of him having to run a profitable business. That is an unsatisfying answer, but it's also, he's not lying when he says that, right? Microsoft being a $3 trillion company does not mean that Microsoft and Satya Nadella are going to allow Phil to go and spend, even if he didn't. So let's say that he did, because some people will say, well, they spent it and that's why they shut them down. Okay, well, if they didn't buy Activision, I want you to keep this in mind. If you had this, if you were a part of that camp, if they didn't buy Activision Blizzard King, their financials were going to contract that year. They would have been in the red. And that's no better a position to be in. The only reason that they had any green metrics really was because of, especially on the software side, it was because of the Activision Blizzard King acquisition. And so stuff like this was going to happen regardless. Everyone in the industry is doing it. Do I think that Tango was the one to shut down personally? No. I've already talked at length about that. No, I do not. But I'm not Phil Spencer. I don't know everything that's going on at Xbox. Maybe he knows more than, I do. And by that, I mean he obviously, absolutely, without question, does. I guess to speculate further based on what we do know, I think Jason Schreier, I think, mentioned, if I'm not mistaken, because I think I've already talked about this before, but there's been so much going on around this, I don't know if I've got it right now, but I'm pretty sure this is the case, that the going idea was that Tango was coming back looking to do a sequel to either Hi-Fi Rush or The Evil Within, but because of what they felt like was a success in Hi-Fi Rush, which it was a success, just to what degree is, the beauty is in the eye of the beholder in that instance. They wanted to grow the team a bit and to have a bigger budget, and that was not in the cards, given the rest of what was going on in Xbox, and so they were targeted for that reason. Is the going knowledge, I guess. None of this was going to ever be satisfying, but I also don't think that there was much else that Phil could have, like I said, possibly really said. Like, what was he going to say that people would have been happy to hear? Like, we shut them down because we spent $100 billion in 5 years on acquisitions? Even if that was the case, do you think that that's going to somehow win people over? Of course not. And so for Phil, he's more or less saying something similar to that. And still holding himself accountable. I think people are not giving Phil enough credit for, once again, not only being the guy who is making the calls to shut these studios down, but also be the guy that goes out on a live stream in front of a live audience with Ryan McCaffrey, knowing that he is going to get these questions asked, and doing it anyway. Like, when Jim Ryan was head of Sony for the length of time that he was, what the fuck did Jim Ryan do whenever we can't pretend there wasn't controversies happening with PlayStation on a semi-regular basis. How often did you really see Jim Ryan come on down and talk like Phil? Right? So I do think that people have to give Phil some extra level of credit for what he does, even when it's not 100% satisfying, because I don't think that there was any satisfying answer he could have given. But yeah, I don't think Tango was the one to shut down. I think that they probably should have been kept around for one more game to see if they could earn their keep on that. They could afford to weather one more from Tango, I'm positive. But I think that there is a not insignificant chance that Satya is now like the Eye of Sauron over top of the Xbox brand, where he might not have been before, because of how much money Phil has spent in the last few years. And I think that was highlighted to some degree because you almost never really hear Satya talking about Xbox. It's so rare, and even he was tweeting about that showcase. So I think that gives you an idea of where his headspace is at.
And you started integrating them into Activision Blizzard King, into Xbox Studios. Has that changed the way that you think about running the business at all? Because the organization just got quite a bit larger, almost overnight in a sense.
No, I mean, we're still, and I hope we show this today, we're going to be about building great games for people to play, about giving them choice on Xbox to go play. We've got a broader library of games. The thing I'm starting to see, which I really love, is the organic collaboration between our teams that are coming out, and trying to build that community of creators that, I mean, you and I will go back to the time of Xbox where we basically had 4 games: Fable, Forza, Gears, Halo. And we would just literally every 4 years, and I would have to come to E3 and I'd somehow try to make those 4 games seem different every year for the community. And now what we have
that was a running joke for years.
Just an amazing collection of
even recently
franchises that are doing great work. So I think, I feel an added responsibility as somebody who loves this industry for the franchises that show up on our stage. But I still think in the end, it's about putting amazing games out. Like, I'm really proud of the work that Ninja Theory did with Hellblade and how Hellblade's been the response to that.
So that's probably going to ring a bit hollow. And this is the one that I would have, if I was Ryan, I might have made an attempt here. Nothing like super pointed. But because Phil brought up Ninja Theory himself and Senua Saga, Hellblade 2. I would find it. I feel like I would find it difficult to not want to ask and say, you know what, Phil? You brought up Ninja Theory and the relatively well received Senua Saga Hellblade 2, fantastic technical showcase, no doubt about it. But when you look at the time scale, cost, and financial success of Hellblade 2 versus Tango Gameworks and Hi-Fi Rush, what assurances can you give to Ninja Theory that they aren't going to suffer a similar fate to Tango with respect to the fact that you do in fact have to run a profitable business? Because there's just no way, with the subtext of that question being, there's just no way in hell, no pun, that Hellblade 2, with the amount of time that they took to make that game and how much extra funding and support they got from Xbox, that game, no matter how much we like it, no matter how good it might be, made as much money or was any more significantly profitable than Hi-Fi Rush. And if it was, the question would have to be begged, is that because Hi-Fi Rush was sold for $4 and change and not advertised? Although in fairness, the Hellblade also suffered a similar fate. They still got more advertising than Hi-Fi Rush, I want to say, but Aaron Greenberg waited until the 11th hour on that one. But that is a question that I would have, if I was Ryan, I would have had a hard time not to want to do that, only because Phil brought up Ninja Theory on his own. If he hadn't just praised them and he hadn't praised that game, I probably wouldn't have. But because he did, I think that would have been a good opportunity to kind of get him to have to frame his answer a bit differently. Then instead of just continuing to push on Tango by itself or closures on their own.
And we have an amazing internal team now that's focused on us doing a bunch of Unreal games as an example. And then you see things like South of Midnight, which might have been my game of the show. I thought it looked so good. You got Perfect Dark, you have Gears. So for us, as the organization gets bigger, I think it's just more important that we can take bets together and try to do innovative, creative things, and that will continue to drive us.
Because saying that stuff on the backs of the studio closures is, how does it not ring hollow? I really am interested. I wish I could be a fly on the wall on some of the smaller studios inside or underneath the umbrella at Xbox Studios recently, because after that Tango Gameworks closure, after Xbox praised them for doing everything right and hitting all these metrics, and this game was truly fantastic. Check out the review here, by the way. I have to imagine that put the fear of God in some people,
All right, well, we've got to take a very quick break, but we've got lots more Phil Spencer talking all things Xbox right here on IGN Live, so don't go anywhere.
That's so good.
We still have so much more to talk about, Phil. You and I in the past have talked a lot about the past of Xbox, because there's a lot of great memories, but the present, as we saw today on the Xbox Game Showcase, is great. The future looks super promising here. And the Xbox business has changed dramatically.
It has.
Dramatically.
No doubt.
Just in the past few years. And so when you make a almost $70 billion acquisition, do you start hearing from your bosses more, or are they still staying out of your way and letting you run the business? Because that's not an insignificant amount of money to spend on growing.
It's definitely not an insignificant amount of money. No, the support we get from the company, and my boss is the CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella. Hey, Satya. We are given a ton of leeway to go.
I love how mildly dismissive Phil was there with that. Like he felt like he had to like even jokingly wave and say that. It's just no, I just found that funny.
And run and grow our business. But I'll say the
Hi,
thing
Mom.
that we challenge ourselves to do.
Sounded
is
like
to
a
try
kid
to do
leaving
new
for
things.
school
Like,
being
I think
dropped
if I
off
go
by their
back
mother. Bye, I
8
love
years
you.
ago, we said, hey, we're going to go ship all of our games on PC and console, and if you buy one on one, you get it on the other. And I got some like reaction from people of this is the worst decision ever. Like this is going to be the end of Xbox. And we announced Game Pass, and we started doing Game Pass. And I know some people looked at that and said, oh, you're going to teach people that games are free. And you're going to undermine the value in games. And what I can say sitting here today from our decisions on cloud, on Game Pass, on console, like right now, we have more Xbox console users than we've ever had in the history of Xbox. And even when I look at things like the impact of Game Pass, because I watch that and I love Game Pass, like how it showed up in the show today, I think was fantastic. But we also want people to be able to buy games. So I go back and I look and I say, okay, over the last 5 years, what's happened to third-party game sales on our platform? We're up double digits every year over the last 5 years on game sales on Xbox consoles. So when I look at it, I will just, doing a $70 billion acquisition will push us to try to do more. It'll push us on cloud. It'll push us to go find customers in new places, continue to think about access to amazing games, enabling creators to do great work. But I actually think for the team, that's just a self-motivation that the team has, and it's fun to be a part of.
Blackout.
So this is another very interesting comment, and this is one that when I was watching it the first time live, I didn't catch, and so I can't say that I wish that Ryan would have followed up with something on that answer, because I didn't catch it either, but. He's talking about double-digit sales for software on Xbox consoles. In the framing of this discussion, and the venue and everything that's going on and whatnot, Phil can say that, and the vast majority of the time, the first things that are passing through your mind, or the assumption that goes through your mind so quickly, along with him saying these things, is that he is discussing current gen hardware, the Series S, the Series X. But if you listen to what he is saying, he's actually just saying Xbox consoles. That is inclusive of previous gen, which is still selling games today, or people are still buying games for those consoles today. The discussion around, for example, on the PlayStation side, where some 50% of all players are still on the PS4 playing Call of Duty or otherwise. That's an important piece, because if you were to just look at the Series S and the Series X, I don't know if you can make that same assertion. And if you could, I don't think that it's as impactful, and I certainly can't imagine that you'd be able to say double digits. And double digits is also like a really soft way of saying, 10%. Like double digits could mean 10%. If it was a really impressive double digit, like we're up 90%, he would have said 90% or 50% or 75%, even 30%. But as soon as you're like south of 25% or south of 20% or something, that's when you're going to start to hear them say things like double digits. So there's a lot of kind of spreading things out here to this is almost the equivalent. Well, it's not spreading out, but this is almost the equivalent of when you were younger and you were sitting at the dinner, at the dinner table, and you had dinner with the family, or mom gave you your dinner. Let's say that, and she's you're eating your dinner, and you don't want to eat any more dinner. You just want to have dessert, but you don't want to eat everything that's left on your plate. And so what do? You scoop everything up. And I have never gotten so many phone calls in one morning. I thought if you're wondering why I've been looking down every once, I'm just like, my phone never rings and I'm just getting blown up. So sorry about that. But like, you're scooping everything to the side, right? Put it in a corner of the plate. Make it look like you've eaten so much of the food that you're supposed to be eating, right? Anything to just get yourself to that, to your dessert. Convince mom that you were good and you ate all of your vegetables. It's kind of like doing that, right? It's how can I say this? How can I make this look like this is better than it actually is? But do it in a way that at first glance, if with everything else that's going on, you don't process it enough to be able to recognize that I'm doing it. And that's kind of what Phil was doing there. That's not to say that isn't still important, that they're selling games on previous gen consoles, because it is important that they're still doing that. But when people are kind of pressing Microsoft, pressing Xbox about their hardware side and hardware sales and what their focus on hardware really is, talking about software sales that are inclusive of your previous generation is not what's passing through their mind. They're not thinking, they're not talking about that. I think Phil knows that, but this is the more favorable answer if he can include those things.
Ops 6 day one Game Pass.
Black Ops 6,
sweet,
dude.
right? Like,
Some people said I wouldn't do that.
Yeah, most people in this room have probably been used to spending $60-$70 on it every year. Now, if they're already subscribing to Game Pass, good to go.
But it's a choice. Like, we didn't say to anybody, you have to subscribe to play. If you want to buy Black Ops, it's great. It's great for us. It's great for the developer. If you want to subscribe, it's also great. Like, I want to give you the choice on how you play your games and who you play with, and not try to do slimy platform things to force you to do what I want you to do. Give the players choice and what they want to do and who they play with.
So this was another point that was brought up. This is going to be a way longer video than I feel like Asmongold right now, taking like a fucking 5-minute video and turn it into a 3-hour marathon. So hopefully this has been a worthwhile video for you thus far. If it has, hit the like button and subscribe. Anyway, YouTube shit. So, this was another point that was brought up and talked about at not at great length, but certainly something that people started to pick up on, and saying that this was kind of an indirect jab at PlayStation, which I suppose I could see why somebody might think that. Because we just had PlayStation, of course, show up and have their tri-CEO discussions around their strategy moving forward, and a part of that was talking about getting stuff to the PC, but like doing so with the understanding to leverage timed exclusives to force people back into the console ecosystem to boost hardware unit sales. And so that, I think people were taking that happened recently, and then Phil is out here saying this, and do I think it was intentional? I don't know. There's an equal chance that he was just saying this because that is his view to some degree of what people have been saying about Xbox and Microsoft buying up a bunch of studios, was the concern that they were never going to be able to play these games on other platforms again if they had existed on other platforms to begin with. That was the contention around things like Starfield, for example. And so I think there's an equal opportunity that there's a bit of column A, a bit of column B. However, that being said, again, this is not new strategy for Xbox, and it's not new stuff coming out of Phil's mouth. He's been saying this stuff for many, many years now. This is clearly their plan. And in the current market, certainly seems like the only way for many of the biggest games that we have been enjoying for a few years now to continue being viable as we move forward. Seems to be the case.
So the Activision Blizzard thing, we watched it play out in courtrooms and regulatory
With
places.
my tie on.
Yeah, I'm curious, what was the biggest
Rare Phil Spencer tie.
Unexpected challenge for you and the team at Xbox during the course of that?
For the management team, like Sarah Bond, Lori Wright, Linda Norman, who's our lead lawyer at Xbox, we all had our same job of running Xbox and doing the things that we needed to go do, Matt Booty. But then we actually added this second job in the time of having to work through regulatory. And I didn't it's my fault as the head of the business. I didn't really internalize that in the beginning of what a drain that would be on the team. And I think we saw that. I think we saw it in our execution on a couple things that we were doing multiple things at a time that we hadn't planned for. And I'll say it's really nice to be post the acquisition, working with those amazing teams. I mean, how they showed up in our show today, fantastic, right? I just thought it was great. I mean, we had World of Warcraft in an Xbox show. It's just crazy.
Yeah, that was weird, Phil. I'm not gonna lie. That one was
in the process, because it really, between the CMA and the FTC
that was odd.
And all these places, was there ever a point where you thought, oh, this might not happen? This might get rejected?
Well, we always have to plan for all contingencies.
Yeah.
We consider everything. You have to in running the business. But we felt like we were on the side of right. Meaning we weren't doing this so we could pull Call of Duty from PlayStation players. It was never in our plans. I mean, I think my whole inbox leaked on the internet. So if anybody wanted to find that was the plan, you would find it somewhere. And it wasn't there. So we believed we were in the right on getting this deal done. So we stayed convicted, but there were dark days, when the CMA came out and said, no, this isn't going to go through. And, the drag on the teams at Activision, Blizzard, and King, they're dealing with this uncertainty. So it's so nice to have it passed behind us, and now we can just focus on building great games together.
On that topic, we talk about all these huge changes to not just the industry, but again, specifically your business, the Xbox business over the last 5 or so years. What is today, as we sit here now, what's the thesis statement? What's the modus operandi for Xbox today, and how has it changed over the last 5 years?
I found this an interesting question from Ryan because Phil has already kind of said it 3 or 4 times during this interview alone and has maintained it, like I was saying a few times now, for 5 years at this point. But I guess this is Ryan giving him the floor to specifically address it, just to drive the point home. And maybe that's a good idea because apparently, no matter how many times Phil has consistently said, what the general direction in which they are trying to take Xbox is. And that's not to say that they haven't lacked consistent or the through line on some other aspects. Other strategy have certainly been wavy, but this point I think has been pretty locked down. Nevertheless, it's probably for the best anyway because people still seem to be a bit confused.
Yeah, and I see some of the feedback that our messaging from some people that maybe our messaging hasn't been consistent.
Yeah.
And I always hear the feedback and I take it. Feedback is great. I will say from early on, we would say when everybody plays, we all win. How do we get in a place where everybody can play video games? And we've made different progress on PC. Now, PC is a huge business for us. We love that we have so many PC players, more than we've ever had. Our console's doing so well. But I think if you sit back and you try to frame this industry through the lens of the tradition of
not that it's the end of the world, but is it really?
That's the only solution to making gaming better. I think Xbox is doing something different than that. We love our consoles, we love our PC players, but really it's about creators and players and amazing games coming to them.
It has, admittedly, for all of us, creators, players. It has been a weird generation because it started weird in this pandemic. And I'm curious, would you do anything differently in this Xbox Series generation? If you could kind of go back and tell yourself,
I'm not really a regrets guy. Like there's 100 decisions I make that, yeah, like in hindsight, maybe I would make it different with all the data. But you got to just bet. You got to bet on yourself and bet on the teams. Have a vision of what you're trying to do. When you get punched in the face, you get back up and you try to go do things. So like, I'm not really one who looks back and say, I wish I would have done this or that. If you're in a position like this, you just, with the team that we have, you just have to believe and you have to keep pushing forward and take the feedback from amazing customers that talk to us every day.
It's a very corporate answer, but it's also not this guy in particular has just been eating this shit up the whole time. This guy is so pumped to be watching Phil Spencer talk about this shit. At the same time, that is true. Phil is heading up an absolutely monstrous team with a historic number of massive groups of developers and publishers below him under this kind of organizational sprawling tree now. And it's true that when you get to, I mean, that logic applies at almost every level of business, but I would have to imagine that when it gets to some sort of critical mass, and certainly Xbox has to be past that critical mass, whatever line you might want to draw. I have to imagine that kind of mindset is perhaps even more necessary than it would be otherwise. He is probably making a shitload of decisions all the time, clearly going to fuck up. Gonna happen. But that's why having a North Star is so important. I mean, having a North Star is important on an individual level, but when you're moving as a giant group like that, I do think it becomes even more important. Otherwise, you've got people going off in a bunch of different directions, and when there is turmoil of any kind, it rattles people further, and it becomes messier and messier. So I think especially given studio closures and acquisitions and this big industry transition that everyone is experiencing right now, the pandemic and everything else, I think that's the right mindset. You have to have a North Star. You have to keep working towards it. You're going to make some bad calls. You're going to make some good calls. That's what he's getting paid for. And only Satya at this point can ultimately decide as to whether or not Phil is earning his keep or if somebody else should be taking his position. But to this point, clearly, things, he seems to be keeping his head above water.
Has the calculus changed? You kind of spoke to Game Pass a little bit and how much of a value proposition has increased after today even, but has the calculus changed on how much Game Pass subscriptions are valued at Microsoft versus direct sales? Like, because now, when Game Pass started, it was, wow, this sounds really cool, and you've pledged to put every first-party release in there, and at the beginning, there weren't a lot of those, but now you're almost, like you had a whole show full of them. So kind of how does that metric for success, like how does Game Pass influence the success of the business?
The thing I look at every morning is how many people played on our platforms and how long did they play. If they played through the subscription or they paid buying their games or they're playing a free-to-play game, I honestly, that's not the most important thing. Game Pass, I love it. I think it's the thing I really love about Game Pass, let me think, in our show today, a game like Mixtape. Like, a game like Mixtape is a game that we can go, Nathan, Val, and I can have a conversation and say, with a team that's been in Game Pass before, when you think about the studio behind, they had great success. Now we're going to do a second game, or like Winterboro, another just awesome game that we can go invest in. And Game Pass gives us an ability you can go invest in Call of Duties and Diablos all day, and we love that, but you also get to invest in new things that come out, and we just think that's a really important part of the equation. So we don't have like one now, Game Pass is up double digits, like, and in most of its growth, we said it, PC is growing really well, cloud's growing really well. But if somebody decides they want to buy their games and build their library, peace. Like there's no, we need to turn everybody into this or that. We just want people to play.
He stopped himself from being really specific about saying that PC has been the main driver for any amount of double-digit Game Pass growth. But again, I don't think it's important because, as he said towards the end there, as long as people are either buying their games or they're doing it on Game Pass or doing it through any of the means in which Xbox is willing to provide them a way to enjoy their games, then they don't care as long as they're doing that, which is fine. At that point, that's a fine strategy to have as long as they can find a way to adequately monetize that individual, then it doesn't matter. But if in order to accomplish some of those various avenues they're not able to on an individual level, monetize that enough, then it becomes a problem. But to this point, obviously it's not. There was some questions many times in the last year about whether or not Game Pass was financially viable long term, and that started to become more and more of a question with the shutdown of things like Tango and otherwise, because things like Hi-Fi Rush are, coincidentally, if not a bit ironically, from a consumer side, probably viewed to be in a similar category, a samey category as a mixtape. Winterboro, maybe not so much, but the mixtape for sure. And at least, even though technically not the case, but from the people watching, at home, or not even watching at home, watching this, but actually just browsing games, they might, say, they look like they're probably about the same in terms of, cost or whatever else, especially since they sold it for $30. Yeah, that's an unfortunate thing for Phil to be saying, because every time he says something like that, the question always comes back to why Tango then? Like, you're describing Tango, you're describing Hi-Fi Rush to a significant degree. It's not a perfect analog, but you are describing, who you shut down, which is why I asked the question, how are these other studios really feeling after an event like that? But yeah, I this is fine. It is important to drill home that they have this strategy and they're willing to stick to it. And clearly, after this showcase, with how many games of good size and scope, not a bunch of budget games, but size and scope and expense, all day one Game Pass. Microsoft and Xbox are clearly not too concerned, at least yet, about the financial viability of the platform.
I want to talk about Fallout for a second. So you guys are currently having an awesome pop culture moment.
Fallout
here
TV show.
months.
Yeah, so good.
So good.
Great show.
But I can't
really
help
enjoyed
think
it.
about that. A year or two ago, I was sitting with Todd Howard with a camera rolling, and I asked him, well, Fallout 5, is that, you want to do that yourself, or maybe now there's all these Xbox studios, you could maybe have some help with it? And he said, no, I want to, that's mine. I'm going to direct that.
Yeah.
But
Todd likes his things.
But does the
no kidding.
Massive success of something like Fallout, I would argue is Xbox's biggest cultural moment in quite a while. Like, it transcended
outside of gaming. Yeah.
And so, after the TV show blows up and there'll be a season 2, and I'm sure it'll probably keep going past that. Do you talk to Todd about, you can't stop the Elder Scrolls 6 and say go do Fallout 5, but you have all these studios. Do you have a conversation about how can we do a new a big new Fallout?
Yeah, you want to capitalize.
The iron's really hot here with the TV show.
Yeah, I'll just say that Todd's recognized the success of the television show on his own, right? He doesn't need me to kind of go and
Big boy Todd.
It is amazing to see how gaming is now playing such a role all up in pop culture. If you go back, like as an old comic nerd, I go back like 10 years, and it seemed like every Hollywood thing came from the comics. And now you see video games and this art form that we've loved for so long, whether it's the Mario movie, Last of Us, Fallout show, like you see our creatives in our industry being recognized for the worlds and storytelling that they can go do. For us specifically, Fallout's been amazing. And yeah, Todd's kind of looking at the plans on what he's doing. I'm not going to get into it, but I'll say Todd has recognized the success on his own and is thinking through what that means.
That sounds an awful lot like Todd is considering perhaps a remaster or a remake of something and handing it to a smaller portion of the team to capitalize on that. I mean, I don't know what the main Bethesda studio size is looking like these days. I have to imagine that, given that we know Starfield's team has been reduced by half or more to this point. I think the last numbers I saw were there were like 200 people on Starfield, continuing the content support there. But given that, and given that we know that they're working on the Elder Scrolls 6, and that does seem to be the next game that is going to be coming out of that main studio. But there are many other branches of Bethesda that are out there. The math that I was doing when I was first thinking about this, given the success of the show, was, well, let's say that the show makes it 2 more seasons, right? So let's say the show makes it 2 more seasons, and there's a year to 18 months in between each season, which for a show of this production level seems about right. Like maybe it goes faster than that. So like if you were to extrapolate that and maybe even tack an extra season on or something, if it got a little extra sauce, you know, you're looking at what, 3 or 4 years or so of runway, and odds are the show is going to be at its absolute peak season 2, season 3. So let's say you've got a 2 to 3 year window to get something out from a game perspective that would help capitalize further than the already boosted or lifted sales of existing Fallout products, like 76, like Fallout 4 and 3 and New Vegas. You know, what can you do in that time frame? And a remaster or a remake seems the way to go. Some of the hurdles that they have, of course, as Bethesda, are that is that how they make their games, the engine and whatnot. I don't think it's very conducive to being able to bring things forward easily. That's why we haven't seen a Morrowind. That's why we haven't seen an Oblivion. But we did see a Skyrim, like a touch up on Skyrim, and so people were pointing at Fallout 3. Maybe it should be Fallout 3. And I think Fallout 3 makes the most sense from a timeline perspective and the success of that game and how much Fallout 4 still kind of, depending on how you look at it, stands up today. But, you know, a lifted version of Fallout 4 in the way that they did Skyrim, like a special edition, seems as likely to me, if not more so, than them reaching back to 3, but you never know. Maybe it's possible. That just seems like a lot of work for even Bethesda to try to nail down in that period of time. I do think that's kind of what Todd would be looking at doing, though, with the timeline that they would have to work with to capitalize on the show's success within reason. You know, what can they actually get accomplished in that time? How much of the team is available given what we know about the current size of the Starfield team, and that Elder Scrolls 6 is next up on the docket for the team. I think that that's a reasonable assumption. If there was something going to happen, that's what they're likely considering, what Todd's considering.
I guess while we're on the subject, have you seen the Elder Scrolls 6 lately? Because I know you get to take a look at a lot of stuff.
Speaking of,
I'll refrain from comment.
I think we all know what
And Ryan knew that was going to be the answer. Phil knew that that was how he's going to sell that answer. Everyone knows the Elder Scrolls 6 is in production. At this point, it would be interesting to know where it is, though. I feel like the Elder Scrolls 6 ends up being a not on launch, but I feel like they're targeting a post Series X Pro world. I don't think it's either that or they'll end up. Well, no, you know what? Okay, here's my prediction. I think at least for now, I think that the Elder Scrolls 6 is targeting the window of time between the Pro release of these current gens and the next gen consoles as a launch, quote unquote launch game for those, which is probably going to be late 2028. So somewhere between 26 and 28. I think that seems to be a reasonable guess as to when that is likely to land. I think the more interesting question now, given what we've been seeing and how Phil's been talking about these things, is, other than Halo being the when does Halo or does Halo end up on PlayStation ever, does the Elder Scrolls also stay on PlayStation? I think it does. I think that game is too big and too expensive and has historically been on PlayStation as well. I think you have to. But I would still try to, if I'm Microsoft, I'd still try to incentivize experiencing it, on Game Pass or on an Xbox console, right? You have to at least try to incentivize it because that's a big. Other than GTA 6, which is a fully independent third-party generational shift that will probably push a bunch of people into the current gen consoles and beyond and finally get them off of last gen, the Elder Scrolls 6 would be in the short list below that for sure.
you mean by that.
That's right, boomy. Boomy.
Oh my goodness. Well, ask Todd to,
Todd,
I know you can't hurry.
Speed it up, Todd.
We're waiting here, pal. There's one other thing I wanted to ask you about that I thought we actually might hear something about from you. I mean, you had a great show. I'm not complaining. But I thought, well, there's something that's been rumored, that's been talked about. We talked about it on the pre-show. There was a big reaction from our audience here, and that is an Xbox handheld.
Yeah.
So,
There are lots of rumors around that.
You're a guy, I mean, you have the gamer score to prove it. You walk the walk. You are not a guy that runs the business and never touches a game. You actually pretty much do nothing but play video games. And I mean that as a compliment.
Phil's about to be a little salty about that.
I do work sometimes, but yeah.
But really, seriously,
I love that. I don't play anything but play video games. It's kind of true.
You've been building the business around this mantra of go where the players are. Whether it's on PC, whether it's through the
cloud. So we should have a handheld.
I think so.
I think we should have a handheld.
Do you want to say anything about
No, I don't want to say. I think you have to have Sarah on. Sarah Bond, our president of Xbox, which is awesome. But the future for us in hardware is pretty awesome. And the work that the team is doing around different form factors, different ways to play, I'm incredibly excited about. Today was about the games.
Yeah.
We showed some of our Gen 9 consoles, Series S, Series X, the work that we're doing. But we will have a time to come out and talk more about platform. And we can't wait to bring it to you guys.
All right. I'm not going to let you off the hook quite.
Okay.
One more
try.
So hypothetically, if Microsoft did an Xbox gaming,
I liked what Ryan asked
device,
here.
Would it be
quite a bit.
Steam Deck-like dedicated piece of hardware that I can play offline, or would it be something I would need a Wi-Fi connection to stream things from?
No, I think what I'm finding, I'll do it this way. So I like my ROG Ally, my ROG Ally is my Lenovo Legion Go, fantastic. My Steam Deck. I think being able to play games locally is really important.
You can
Very good
read
answer.
between the lines on that, as you will. All right. We're going to take a very quick break, but we're not done with Phil. We're going to bring in some friends, some Xbox developers.
Yeah, there's another segment, but Phil's basically just sitting on the couch and they're just talking. They talk about some other stuff, but that would be. I don't think there needs to necessarily be a video for that. And this video is already way longer than I had planned it to be. We're just cranking out hour-long friggin' videos this week. So, obviously, Phil is a fan of the idea of Xbox having a handheld. I think that he is comfortable. I think it's obvious he's comfortable in flirting with the general public a bit about an Xbox handheld. I think that I think that it makes sense, but also doesn't make sense. So, I guess let me try to explain what I mean by that. Like, why do I think it doesn't make sense for Xbox to have a handheld? It makes sense in one way because they want to meet everyone where they are and allow them to play their games wherever and be in that Xbox ecosystem or that Microsoft gaming ecosystem, wherever they are, whether it's on the phone or otherwise. And having a handheld, seems to be a good way of entering that. And so, like, on the surface level, that makes sense. But why I think it doesn't make a lot of sense is that, Phil already listed 3 or 4 different devices that exist that Game Pass could feasibly run on. Or xCloud in the future. And it would mean that they don't have to worry about maintaining another hardware SKU. I'm struggling to imagine why Xbox would ever commit to having 3 different SKUs, especially given their dedication to having their first-party developers and otherwise ensure that games can run well on the Series S as well as they, as obviously for the X. And so to step that down further, because the handheld would be another step below the S. I struggle to imagine why, like that there's a lot of moving parts there that I'm trying to think of, like, where is the value add or where is the monetary gain to be had there other than the obviously higher percentage cut if they wholly own everything through the whole stack. So the handheld, the publishing platform, the developers, the whole 9 yards. Great. But it's not cheap to develop hardware. It's not cheap to produce hardware. And those handhelds that he's talking about, Steam Decks and the ROG Ally and the Lenovo Legion or whatever, it's not like they're flying off the shelves, right? I mean, there's a market for them, but they're not just, they haven't taken over the bloody world. There's been a lot of marketing pushes to try to get more people invested in some of these things. More companies have been coming into the space, trying to jump on the bandwagon, but it's still a messy market. It feels a bit like the VR market to a degree. And you wouldn't perhaps think that because of the success of the Switch, but the Switch is kind of like in its own ecosystem, its own little environment. Whereas when you're talking about doing this, it's like this high performance piece with totally different expectations, and the games that it's expected to run are different and whatnot. To speak to the question that Ryan asked, or how he asked the question, I did find it interesting because it allowed him to ask a question referencing the PlayStation Portal without actually mentioning PlayStation's name or the Portal, which would be important here in this context. And allowed Phil to say that, at least in his opinion, and I would suspect anyone at this point with a brain would hold the same opinion, that if you're going to go out of your way to develop any kind of hardware for a handheld, being able to use it in such a limited fashion as something like the PlayStation Portal is unlikely to be, even for Microsoft with all that they're doing from the service side, is unlikely to be worth the hassle. You're going to want to have that local render capabilities, I think, to really make that work. What would I do? Little old me sitting in his basement with too many wires behind him. What would I do? I would get rid of the S. When the next generation of consoles comes around, and I would probably wait that long, especially, let things wash out a bit more. I would wait until the 2026, 2027, 2028 window in there somewhere and say, okay, moving forward, this is, they're going to still have to, they're still going to have to support the S, but the next gen Xbox, the two SKUs are the equivalent to the Series X and then the handheld. The handheld replaces the S. Maybe you even dock it like a Switch. I don't know. But I think that's the only way you do it. There's just, I cannot fathom wanting to add another SKU to the list of stuff that developers have to try to tackle. I just don't, and consumer confusion and the whole night. I don't think that's the way to go. I think you run two of them at best, and if you're going to do that, you keep the big beefy boy at the top of the chain for those that just want nothing but couch gaming at the peak performance of what you can get for your $500 or whatever it's going to sell for, $5,000 by 2028, and then your handheld. I think that's the way to do it. But we're going to have to wait to see what as Phil said, what one Miss Sarah Bond, the president of Xbox and the head of hardware, has to say about it. And perhaps towards the end of this year, some of the other events that are coming up that are more hardware focused, maybe we're going to get more out of them. But for now, I think Xbox is taking this W on this week of what is, I guess, tentatively still referred to as the Summer Game Fest week, although that feels like it's already kind of crumbling in and of its own. I think they're going to take the dub. I think they're going to. I think their focus at this point should just be to really nail the games, make sure that these games that they've announced are hitting big, and continue to just try to expand their services wherever they can. And we'll have to wait until later in the year perhaps to find out some more. And then also, like I said in my last video, knowing Xbox, every time they manage to do something that nets them good PR, almost without fail, in a very short period of time following that good PR, they manage to place their own rake to step on and just ruin all goodwill that they just built up. Like, it just, that seems to be, every time, that seems to be what they do. Hopefully that doesn't happen again this time. Maybe this is the time where they finally hold on to the W for more than 3 seconds before yeeting it into the sun. I don't know. They just love holding on to L's for some reason. It's just a confusing thing. But there you go. We won't make the video any longer. Hour and a half. This is maybe keeping you company on the way to work or maybe during your lunch break or something. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Hit the like button if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe if you're feeling particularly fancy. Let me know if you enjoy this kind of content in the comment section below. And let me know what your thoughts are on, if you haven't already, on what's going on here in this interview. You know, what do you think about Phil's responses? What do you think about Ryan's questions? How are you feeling about all this in general? How are you feeling about Xbox's prospects moving forward for the next couple of years? Because we now have a pretty decent idea, at least going into 2026, about what things are likely to look like. So let me know, and I'll see you guys real soon. Until then, have a good one, and peace.